Yeah, well, that was the group that I was planning on introducing it to. There's another group that I have a 5 o'clock prayer meeting with every morning. It's called Men's Huddle, and it's a prayer group. It's about 29 men. Raleigh is a part of that group, and from all over the country, and we meet and have prayer on the reconciliation effort. And they meet every morning at 5 a.m. and we meet for 1 hour. And Men's Huddle is initiating the conference in Washington on June the 15th. And there's supposed to be a meeting of this 2019 group in Washington on June the 12th, where 400 people are going to be there, and Vice President Pence is going to be speaking on this new 2019 movement. And I've been invited to be a part of that 400. And so my wife and I have been invited to be a part, my brother Jerry and his wife. So looking at those two groups, and the Promise Keepers, I think I think we have something to contribute, something to bring together, and help all of us to do a better job and be more focused, I guess, and more concentrated in our efforts, and not just doing stuff individually. Men's Huddle and Promise Keepers and the Dr. Green's department in Washington is where I would think would be beneficial for us to be a part of those groups.
So do you have a contact information for both of those? You don't need it now, but
yes, I have contact information.
Okay,
and contact people also.
What we're proposing to do is compose a letter and send it out, introducing ourselves and just saying we shouldn't be isolated, we shouldn't be separated, and we need to be knowing about these meetings. I was appalled when they had that big meeting in Atlanta last August, and we had not heard anything about it. And it had 23,000 people repenting. So I thought, something's wrong here. You know, and I had a contact that could have told us about it. So, you know, it's not to get offended about it, but it's just to say this isn't working too well. We need to keep others in the loop too. So, and even the little things we have, they're not big, but they could grow bigger if we could get the word out. I don't know. Tell me what you think, because you've been saying several times that we need to be better connected. So,
but I can talk to those three people that I just mentioned, and also the meeting on Wednesday with the Vice President of the Southern Baptist Conference. I can also talk to him about that also.
Yes. Well, we'll have this page designed within a week. It won't take long. And so we would send out the letter saying, if you're interested in being, we'll call it Let's Get Connected or something like that. And we'll send the letter out to the ones we know, and then you're gathering names, Jack, and others of you. So if you just help us gather these names to contact, then they can, you know, take the initiative to go to that page and sign up.
So what are you calling Let's Get Together?
Let's get connected. Or we could call it Connect the Dots. We could call it Connect the Dots. I'm open to suggestion. We're not locked into anything.
No. I'm saying is that a group for an event or coming together as a coalition.
No, I think it's just trying to get a list together different organizations and a contact person in each organization. So either us or one of these other organizations could put information out to all of the organizations, and then they could decide whether to distribute it to their people or not, to their list. We're not trying to get, everybody's list, like Promise Keepers would be overwhelming, but just a contact person, so we'd have a better feel, not only us, but all these other groups would have a better feel of things that are going on that they might be interested in. But you guys need to tell us if you think we're wasting our time.
To me, even if other groups are, now we could tie in if some other group is doing something very similar, but we're just offering a free service to all the groups, a way to get their announcements out further.
I think it's great. I've been for that from the very beginning. Just started having these discussions.
Yeah. Do you have any reserves or suggestions about how to make it go right?
Well, I know Elmo is part of this, so the Unity group here, for sure, and I may have a couple of other people that I learned from scholarship, but I don't have a relationship with them, but I can provide their contact for some follow-up.
Carlton, you look like you're thinking hard. What do you think?
Well, actually, I am. We talked about this earlier, and I'm sitting here looking at the list. I keep a bookmark in my browser of reconciliation movements and activities, and there's a lot that's here. Since last week, when Janine, you and I talked about some of this, I got to thinking about it. And I think there's real merit to it. But something dawned on me that had not occurred to me before. And Paul, ironically, you would be the one person who's on this call that could bring some perspective that none of the rest of us have. And that's this. We all know that there are a lot of groups that are addressing reconciliation. But each one of us is very different in ways. We're similar in some very general ways, but we're very specific and very different in terms of application and perspective in other ways. And I realized to have each other's information would be really valuable. But I think to understand also, as much as it's possible, the nature of each of our groups would help us to get a much better sense of maybe how we can approach this. And the reason, Paul, that I bring you up is this. I've been reading a book. It has absolutely nothing to do with reconciliation, but it's a book on transgenderism. The guy who wrote the book talked about how the human body is organized a certain way. And it's organized because the way that the systems work, they all work together. And I got to thinking about it. Our respiratory system, we all know that we have lungs, but that's not the only part of our system. If all we had were lungs, we still couldn't function. But, Paul, because you know human anatomy, each of our systems has very different organs that are organized a certain way. They relate together a certain way, and all together they're able to fulfill the stated function that they have.
Absolutely right.
You got your lungs, you got your esophagus, you have all of these other things that work together. Well, if we're all doing reconciliation, maybe what God has done has been to put very specific types of functions that all really are designed and organized to work together to create a broader function. Do you see the point that I'm making? It's as much as getting information from one another. The other thing that may well accompany that, and I'm not sure who takes it on, maybe Promise Keepers takes it on, I don't know, but that someone would take responsibility not only for knowing who, but also understanding maybe the nuances of the various mission statements, so that we actually start to understand a little bit more of how we can work together.
Yes.
You know, Carlton, I don't want to hog the conversation, but this is very exciting to me, what Carlton just said, because I think it's consistent with what Raleigh is saying when he says and reveals what Ephesians 2 talks about, where it says it is through two men that God has made one new man and has removed the middle wall of partition, which is the law, and how he describes how God came into humanity's realm through the Jews, gave them the law, sent his son to live the law. He died, and they rejected it. And the gospel went out to the Gentiles. And the Gentiles make up every other class of human being in the earth. So God has dealt with two groups. And so we have to call in saying what's consistent with what he has done for us as that one new man.
Well, it's very
what is our
interesting.
role? That one new man is to minister to the Gentile world the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. Well, you know, he said it's make one new man through the cross. So it is through the cross that the two are brought together. And I think that's incredibly interesting. I'm very much involved with the Messianic Jewish movement in the United States. I've led 8 medical teams working out to the Jewish diaspora. So I'm very connected with the Messianic Jewish groups. So, I mean, I don't know if that fits in any particular way.
But Raleigh emphasizes the Messianic Jewish group.
Well, I'm very connected with them.
In particular. I don't know where all of this is going, but what Carlton said was very interesting. Let me be quiet.
Here is the thing. Here's the thought. There is a call that I get on periodically. It's every few weeks, and these are brethren who have looked at, have been involved in various aspects of leadership as well as reconciliation. And about several months ago, in that conversation, and probably the initial conversation with the broader group, one of the leaders brought a perspective concerning very practically an outworking of leadership that addressed reconciliation. I think I mentioned it before, talked about it in terms of 3 kinds of leaders. There were racial advocates, there were bridge builders, and the third group were transcendent leaders. But they talked about it in terms of the issue of reconciliation. And all 3 were necessary. And the observation was that they tend to work at cross purposes from each other. The only reason that I bring that up is this. That perspective was quite helpful in understanding how the broader body of Christ starts working together toward reconciliation. 3 very different groups of leaders, but all working together for a very specific purpose. There's a group that's down in Somebody Cares International. Oh, what's his name?
Doug Stringer.
Doug Stringer, thank you. They had a reconciliation week up in Baltimore last year. Doug's very established, and they've done a whole lot concerning that. Now, they're not specifically reconciliation, but it is a focus.
Yes.
There was in Orlando earlier this year that the international, it's Ministry IRD, Ministry Reconciliation and something. Oh gosh, the name will come to me in a moment. I'm having a senior moment in that regard, but. The whole thing was that the conference that they had, which was earlier this year, was specifically about reconciliation, dovetailed off of something Ryan Bomberg had put in place. And again, I mentioned that on the call. But here are 2 or 3 very different groups that are looking at this thing, and there's wisdom that God's giving them in terms of various ways of approaching. Now, Somebody Cares is very different than Reconciliation Eagles. IRD is very different than Somebody Cares. Promise Keepers, again, very different. John Dawson has his International Reconciliation Coalition. All of these groups, God has given something to concerning reconciliation, which to me suggests, just like the human body is organized, that we're organized into systems where each one has our own unique functions, but we need all of those working together.
That's I started out with the when we had our first meeting. You weren't there yet, Carlton, in Richmond, and with the analogy of a tapestry.
I remember you talked about that.
Yeah, so that was our beginning image. In fact, I had somebody do a graphic for me on that, because that is what that I could see. You know, that it's a tapestry that God weaves together, or a quilt. And
well, it is, and it actually functions together if you can understand it. Some years ago, you all know that we pulled together intercessors here in Cleveland. We had the Northeast Ohio Intercession Network. There probably were 15 to 20 prayer ministries that were here, and we all knew about each other. But something occurred to me that said, you need to go to the leaders of each of those groups and ask them specifically, can you send me your mission statement, so that I understand and know the distinctives of your group. And it was fascinating to sit and look, not just knowing the names, but knowing the function of the groups, their priorities, and it really gave a much greater sense of how we can work together, because you knew something more than just simply a name.
Well, there's a frustrating aspect to this I've experienced. I guess as the leader of this group, that I haven't known what to do with. I've had 2 people at least, but I think just 2 asked to be removed from our list.
I've been very involved with trying to network within the medical community, medical missions. I've actually written a paper about the body of Christ and the various components. In fact, when you mentioned about having the body, somebody who could actually have an oversight of the different functions within reconciliation efforts, that makes an awful lot of sense if people would recognize what those functions are, and then recognize those functions in each other to reveal to other individuals, I see this is your function, and someone else, I see this is your function, but then we can work together, because the body only works together when it cooperates with each other. The left leg can't go north and the right leg go south. You know, you just can't do that. And yet that's what's happening in so much of our work. And even within the medical missions, there's a lot of issues of who gets the credit, who's responsible, and what are the doctrinal issues. But I've actually worked through an awful lot of those. But there is a need for that. And there are huge reconciliation efforts within the medical field. Like even the Austin Disaster Relief Network has a 24-hour prayer movements that are doing the reconciliation issues that are working together, among themselves, but they are not working with just specifically reconciliation issues like Eagles, Reconciliation Eagles.
Paul, isn't it ironic that what you just talked about in terms of the competition and the protectiveness and the turfism, isn't it interesting that in a movement that talks about people coming together and being properly related, disconnect because of other issues? That makes me think that the issues aren't inherently just a matter of reconciliation. I think that there needs to be a greater understanding of the church and how it's really meant to function in and of itself. Reconciliation, a manifestation of that, or is a real need for that. That's not something we can address in this meeting at this time. But I think you can't separate it from the larger discussion. And maybe one of the things that we need to take on, if we're going to talk about reconciliation, is to couple that with a larger discussion about the nature of the body of Christ and how it is to work together. Because otherwise, we're so segmented, we're so compartmentalized that our defaults are, let me pull away and protect what I've got, because I don't appreciate that I'm a part of a larger body that's multifaceted.